Well, hey, Gundam Maniacs, welcome to another episode of Gundam Explained. For this episode, I'm actually going to look at the science behind the new type phenomenon. Yes, the new type sort of thing that occurs in Universal Century, where it kind of has the brainwave stuff. We see the Psychomu system, psycho waves, psycho frames, and tons of that stuff. But I want to get into the science. Could it be real? But before we get started, if you haven't, please subscribe. And if you think this video is cool, give it a like and blah, blah, blah. I say this stuff all the time, but hey, look at the links in the description below. All right, let's get started. All right, so the new type phenomenon, what am I talking about exactly? Well, what it seems to be is as humans kind of moved into space and like over time, and it could be due to evolution, and it could be due to being in space, and that's actually another aspect I'm going to get into here in a second. But I guess humans just started showing other traits where their brain waves had a degree of manipulation, whether that is interfacing with an object or being able to potentially talk to dead people, maybe communicate or sense things over distances. And I would say Universal Century does a good job of portraying new types and cyber new types in a non-fantastical matter, even if it's portrayed on screen visually in a fantastical matter, like showing waves and random colors and things moving around. I mean, that's really the artist's interpretation of how to show off something that's not really a visual thing, not something that's in everyday life. And so the reason I found it very interesting about humans moving into space and eventually developing these possible abilities has to do with something called morphic resonance, and it seems to be that this is something that's talked about a lot. And now to backtrack a little bit, it really depends on how much you really know about physics or what you believe when it comes to what we know about particle physics, quantum mechanics, expansion of the universe. You know, part of my view is that we're probably data contained in a single point, but it is our perception that makes it seem like there's space and time. I don't know what that means, but that's just what I'm coming from here. Morphic resonance would align with that, because the idea here is that over large distances, groups of humans or non-humans, this could be animals as well, can like change their behavior or learn things that would normally take either amount of time because it has to pass through generations and pass around the world. But let's look at some examples of what I'm talking about. So, study number one, Sheldrake conducted a study in which a group of English school children were asked to learn and memorize 3 different Japanese rhymes. A popular rhyme known by millions of Japanese, a meaningless series of Japanese words arranged to look meaningful, and a brand new Japanese verse created expressly for this study. Keep in mind, none of these children knew the Japanese language, and neither Sheldrake nor the students knew which rhyme was which. The children, and this is the result, the children were able to learn the popular, well-known Japanese rhyme much more quickly than the other two. Conclusion, the results support Sheldrake's hypothesis that this rhyme was connected to a well-formed morphic field developed over a considerable period of time, which subtly enabled these children to learn the rhyme more quickly via resonance. That is to say, over a period of time, a mutual resonance had been established between human organisms and this field, unconsciously supporting them in learning the rhyme. If this interpretation is correct, it would imply that human beings regularly entrain on a subtle level to various informational fields that make daily tasks much easier to learn and master through an incredibly refined and as yet undetectable form of mutual resonance between field and organism. And so it's talking about resonance, and resonance is a big deal too, because a lot of what exists in the world is due to resonance. There's different frequencies of things, and these frequencies allow it to have its structure in a material universe, if that makes sense. So that kind of makes sense if the fact is we are in one single point, and it's really our perception that is telling us that there's space and time, that it is possible to pick up some sort of resonance in information, especially if it's also the fact that our brains are just developed to the point to where we're actually picking up this more awakened consciousness, awareness that humans have over other animals. All right, in this other study, psychologist Arden Malberg invented a new form of Morse code, which he taught to a group of subjects. He also taught them the official Morse code. The group acquired and memorized the official Morse code much more quickly than the newly invented code. So that's interesting, because that's kind of like a quick way they were able to determine this, whereas with the previous one, you know, I think like cars, automobiles, everyone drives now. Like, there's so much driving that's going on when that wasn't a thing before, but it seems like it's quite a lot to teach someone how to use a car, how to drive. And it could just be, yeah, just individually, people are learning and doing it, but cars are becoming more advanced, things are becoming more advanced. It could just be with the information sharing, we're able to quickly get knowledge to people. But what if there really is something to this morphic field? We're part of us collectively able to like move forward in evolution is not maybe just the body and our environment, but also our mind and how we're connected. Okay, so for study number 4, Sheldrake conducted a study in which the maze learning errors of rats were plotted over several generations. Every possible variable was painstakingly controlled, including age, aptitude, and many other variables. So they're even considering generations here. The resulting graph indicated that later generations of rats mastered the maze more quickly than their forebears. This result was repeated even when the more sluggish, less proficient were allowed to breed. This evidence supports the notion that morphic fields accumulate over time and thereby support the learning and growth of future generations through resonance. Now, you could also say, well, maybe that's embedded into the DNA, because that's also another kind of theory of how DNA works. There's some certain aspects that, as scientists, as humans, we don't really understand what's going on, especially what dictates sometimes the way the DNA controls what happens with the body as it's growing. It makes sense here that they did the test over generations. So if it's not necessary, and it actually could be the same thing if you think about generations or within a single generation of being able to get a lot of people to learn, could the DNA then be getting encoded with this information? And this is another one that I always found interesting because monarch butterflies are known to migrate to Mexico, taking anywhere from 4 to 5 generations for the group to complete the journey. This phenomenon in itself supports the hypothesis of a guiding morphic field that supports succeeding generations in making the trip. So that almost goes against what I was thinking could be an argument against the morphic field for the previous one when it comes to generations, but this is actually explaining it very well. I remember that was something I read a long time ago, and I just didn't understand how that works, that over generations, a super butterfly will form to make sure that they complete the journey. That's pretty interesting. Could that mean there could be superhumans that are born randomly throughout generations, and maybe we don't know? Maybe we're living in a society that kind of limits our understanding, which is probably the case, of being able to figure that stuff out. That's maybe where a new type would come from. It's probably the generation we get into space. Humans are separating themselves from each other, destroying the Earth. Maybe this is some sort of morphic next step in evolution. Okay, so multi-person brain-to-brain interfaces. So, looking in this article, it's pretty interesting because they are trying to figure out how to get brains to talk to each other. And they're able to do that with tools using basic like binary communication, ones and zeros. While it requires tools to get this done, it's not able to happen like the psycho waves or brain waves. They noticed during this experiment that the brain waves travel on the electromagnetic spectrum. So think about that with when it comes to Gundam and Universal Century with the Newtypes and how are they getting that information across? You could then argue it could be this phenomenon seen here where they're seeing the brainwaves that are crossing the electromagnetic spectrum, electromagnetic field. That's the field that it uses to propagate. So that could be a very plausible answer for that, especially if a psychoframe is used to enhance the resonance of the new type, then of course something like this could occur. Okay, so running computer simulations to model their hypothesis, the researchers found that electrical fields can mediate propagation across layers of neurons. While the field is of low amplitude, it's able to excite and activate immediate neighbors, which subsequently activate more neurons traveling across the brain at about 10 centimeters per second. They were even using mice in blocking where fields would interact, and they were able to see a slowed down speed of the wave. So they're actually manipulating brain waves. And this gets to another aspect of the new type phenomenon in Universal Century. And some of the things you see at first happen to do with a lot of times characters will be in scenarios where maybe they're about to die or they're in a heightened state. And a lot of times another character will like appear that's has already passed. It happens quite a bit in the Universal Century Gundam. Sometimes it's I forget which character it was that was gonna get killed, but he's picturing the one he loved right before he died. A little different than what I'm getting at here Because, let's see. When it comes to the near-death experiences, they often include such features as seeming to leave the physical body, seeing an unusual bright light, and feeling extreme emotions of joy, peace, and love, which is in line with what we see in the Universal Century Gundam when it comes to the Newtype abilities. For over 3 decades, researchers in the Division of Personality Studies at the University of Virginia have investigated more than 550 cases of NDEs. One of the most striking observations that we have made is that the vast majority of people reporting these experiences to us say that they have lost all fear of death and have become convinced by the experience that they will survive physical death. Furthermore, even a cursory examination of the popular literature or media coverage about the subject indicates that for most of the general public, the primary interest of these experiences is the light they may shed on the question of whether human consciousness survives the death of the physical body. I mean, a lot of this comes up because people want there to be a life after death. And, even growing up, I was like, oh, yeah, I want there to be some life, something after death. But I accepted for some reason that, oh, yeah, we're just going to be dead and that's it. To me, that made the most sense. And I was fine with that. It just wasn't until experiences that I've had, research I've been doing, that I'm thinking, yeah, there is more to this, and it's good that we have people that are willing to study this, because I think it's in this, on the top of this study here, they're saying few scientists have taken seriously the interpretation of near-death experiences. And so that is the thing here. When it comes to a phenomenon like this, a lot of times it's going to be hard for a researcher to get money, to get a grant, to actually go into research like this, because if they were to tell someone, hey, I want to do this study, I need some money, they might look at it and be like, what? And I think that's the case for a lot of these sort of the pseudoscience that comes out when there's not strong data, something that maybe requires a lot of money. People aren't really doing that. So anyway, that's about it about the Newtype phenomenon and how we can scientifically show that it works. I'll have the links for these papers in the description, but between the morphic field, which kind of explains how a large, wide group of people can have the similar traits, and then also using the electromagnetic spectrum or electromagnetic field to actually propagate waves, and then lastly, the near-death experiences where people are seeing possible relatives and they have this feeling of joy, seeing colors and lights and all that. All of these things I explained are in Universal Century Gundam, and it really helps support that fantastical element to give some interesting story, but then also ground it a bit. And again, I do this a lot, but I compare it to Star Wars, how with the Force, George Lucas wrapped that in Eastern philosophies, which is not too far removed from that. They're just looked at in different ways. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. If you have any other thoughts about the scientific basis for the Newtype phenomenon, please leave them in the comments below. I'd like to talk about that a bit more. But anyway, see you later.